Ukrainian forces have re-invaded Russian sovereign territory, this time in the city or oblast of Belgorod. Just why are the Ukrainians turning around and going right back into Russia? Is this all part of a strategy, or is this just a feint or trick meant to stop the Russians from advancing? Plus, is Donald Trump finally getting the message that the rest of the world knew 3 years ago, that Putin isn't actually negotiating in good faith? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this, I thought, was one of the most interesting stories. Now, I've heard reports about Ukrainian forces going into Belgorod for several days, but I actually didn't want to address them because my thinking was that it was probably a feint or a diversion, right? As Ukrainian forces, as you may recall, were withdrawing from the Kursk region, under a lot of pressure from Russian forces. It made just logical sense that the Ukrainians were going to try to divert or push into those Russian forces via some sort of flank. And this seems to be the area where the fighting was reported, and it would make a lot of sense to try to pressure Russian forces here along this kind of southern flank, pushing into the Ukrainians in Kursk. Because remember, while we look at this boundary as being some sort of really discrete entity, tactically, it doesn't really confer anything, right? There's no reason. This boundary, when you're conducting cross-border military operations, it's completely porous. And so you have these Russian forces that are, it makes logical sense that you would want to feint or pressure them kind of lightly with attacks, but not necessarily any sort of staying power as they're pushing into Ukrainian troops. This would take the pressure off of them and allow those troops to kind of dig in further. However, it appears now, increasingly, we're seeing reports that the Ukrainians are actually staying in Demidovka. This is up to 2 to 3 kilometers into Belgorod. And I think this is part of a larger, deeper Ukrainian strategy that holds that the Russians operate like a battleship, right? They are unwieldy, they are slow, but when they finally can turn their massive army's attention on to a specific sector, they're able to put tremendous pressure on it. Again, like a battleship, once it's turning and barreling down on you, it's almost impossible to stop. And so the Ukrainians have said, well, let's use that to our advantage. This is my thesis. And that is to say, we are going to withdraw from Kursk as the battleship is pointing at us there, and we are going to instead show up just a few degrees on the battleship's flank, so to speak. And then what they presume will happen will be the battleship will turn slowly, lumberously in towards the Ukrainians in the Belgorod region. And once it does so, they're going to withdraw, right? Turning into a sort of hit and run tactics along the cross regions of the border. I think this has some potential, but as we've seen, the Ukrainians struggle to find a sort of sustainable offensive pattern against Russia the way Russia can against Ukraine, right? The Russians have this high casualty, high attrition strategy, but it is a strategy and it does produce gains. The Ukrainians, in turn, have never really found a way to sustainably take and hold territory from the Russians. Instead, they've relied increasingly on a sort of light hit and run kind of tactic, carving out tiny little chunks of Russian territory, oftentimes in places where it makes the Russian larger offensive effort in a region more vulnerable. So I think this is just kind of a natural continuation of that, but it remains to be seen if it's going to deliver real meaningful gains for the Ukrainians or even confer the tactical advantages that they hope it will. Now, before we talk about the other story, which is equally crazy, namely the president finally realizing perhaps that maybe Putin isn't the nice guy he thought he was. However, I want to mention a few things. First, even though the United States feels like it has, we're going to generously say pulled away from aiding Ukraine, that doesn't mean that Americans have pulled away from helping Ukraine. That's why UAO is running their double down fundraiser. And what this is, the reason it's called Double Down is because an anonymous donor in the Netherlands has said, listen, I'll match every dollar of donations the Americans raise. And so if you can donate $100, right, it'll raise $200 for Ukrainian forces. And while this massive fundraiser is going to benefit a ton of different units, most notably actually is going to be the RTAN team of the Military Intelligence Directorate. This is the Ukrainian version of the CIA's Special Activities Division. So if you donate $250, boom, you score a patch from the GRU or the GUR and the RTAN team. So check it out. The link is in the description. Plus, of course, guys, you're definitely going to want to check out strikegum.com. Get that caffeine that you know you need. We've got an entire energy drink's worth of caffeine in every single piece. And of course, we're on Amazon. So link to both of those in the description. Be sure to check it out. Okay, so this I thought was another really interesting story, is that Trump, in a phone call with NBC News, said he's pissed off and very angry at Putin. Now, here is why specifically. Trump said that Putin's latest demand, which has come out of left field, this is not something that was discussed. This is something that Putin has kind of alluded to at different times in his as Putin's alluded to in different times, that kind of his propaganda spin, trying to say that Zelensky is not a legitimate leader of Ukraine. And what's worth pointing out, again, is that Zelensky, not a dictator, despite what both Putin and at times President Donald Trump have said. The Constitution of Ukraine is eminently clear because Ukraine is literally invaded by Russia numerous times throughout its history. It happens so frequently that they literally just built that contingency into their constitution that says that when Russia invades, the president doesn't have to hold elections. And it makes sense because, as you may note from this map here, you may notice a small detail that 20% of Ukraine's people are under Russian occupation, which means it's very hard to collect their votes. And so for that reason, the Ukrainians have said, we're not going to hold elections while a huge portion of our population is disenfranchised, right? And Zelensky, of course, could be ousted by the Ukrainian State Duma at any time and replaced with another leader. So he is still subject to accountability by his government. But you can't hold elections when a huge portion of your country is under occupation. But Putin wants to promote that in order to muddy the waters, to make it look like, well, it's actually not a fight between a democratic free country and a autocracy like Russia. Actually, Putin says it's a fight between two dictatorships, which it is not. Putin is a dictatorship. He has been in power for 25 years. His primary political rival, Alexei Navalny, died in a Russian gulag. So that right there should tell you exactly who is the dictator. Putin saying that, in fact, he's like, I won't even sign an agreement with Zelensky. You need to put in a totally different leader. Basically, Putin saying, I demand the right to veto the leader in charge of Ukraine. Because remember, here's Putin's playbook. If he establishes veto power over something, the right to say no, all he has to do is say, oh, Zelensky, he's not legitimate. I won't do business with him. And then the Ukrainians put up another pro-Zelensky politician, let's say his deputy. Well, then Putin goes, no, I can't do business with him. He's also illegitimate. And Putin will say, actually, here's the list of people I can do business with. And lo and behold, what do you think they're going to be? They're going to be pro-Russian shills. And so this is standard Putin. Own the veto, own the entity, right? If you can establish a veto power over someone else's actions, this is just like NATO. He wants the right to veto NATO membership because if he can do so, he can simply say, listen, NATO, you're never going to expand again because I now have the right to tell you who you can and can't let into your organization. Again, it's like your neighbor across the street telling you who can and can't visit your home, right? In effect, they have now controlled your front door, right? And so Trump finally, at long last, says, yeah, these peace talks not going in the right direction. He said, quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and I think it was Russia's fault, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which then Trump says, it might not be, which just kills me to see him be unable, to be so spineless, to say, well, I don't want to make him too mad. I don't want to make Putin too mad, guys. I'm sorry. I thought you were the president of the largest economy and the largest military and the largest nuclear arsenal on earth. You don't get, like, Putin doesn't, you don't need to be like, oh, don't be mad at me, Vladimir. What? Okay, which it might not be. But he said, if I think it was Russia's fault, by the way, guys, this entire war is Russia's fault, and the peace talks falling apart is Russia's fault. He says, I'm going to put secondary tariffs on oil and all oil coming out of Russia. Trump said, that would be if you buy oil from Russia, you can't do business with the United States. There will be a 25% tariff on all oil and a 25 to 50-point tariff on all oil, which is weird. But then Trump said, listen, I have a very good relationship with Putin. And he said, anger dissipates quickly if he does the right thing. Which again, Vladimir Putin has yet to do anything resembling the right thing. The closest he came to a good faith action was his energy infrastructure ceasefire. But those of you that follow the channel know that Vladimir Putin did what he always does, which is pretend, play ignorant, where he sat there and said, oh, actually, he put in the transcript, he said, all I agreed to was an energy infrastructure ceasefire, which protects basically my most strategic asset, which is the infrastructure to extract and export oil. And Ukraine, which does not have the same kind of energy export economy, it doesn't really benefit that much. Whereas Ukraine thought they had agreed to an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, which basically Ukraine said, we won't target Russian energy facilities if you don't target our civilian infrastructure. Those are two totally different agreements. And it's not an accident that Vladimir Putin suddenly forgot how to translate from English to Russian, right? This is not something that someone who has been in power and negotiated with the United States for nearly a quarter of a century, that's not the kind of error these people make. He deliberately misunderstood so that he could blame Ukraine for misinterpreting the deal, right? And again, as we've pointed out, Russian drones have continued to pound Ukrainian civilian sites basically this entire time. The Americans are running around looking foolish as they pretend like they can just save the deal if only they can clear up this misunderstanding, not understanding that there isn't really a misunderstanding. So again, Vladimir Putin continues to just sort of humiliate the White House and make them run around pretending to solve a problem that doesn't exist. This is no different than if you have a dog and you put the tennis ball behind your back and then you make a throwing motion. The dog goes, where's the tennis ball? Right? That's what Vladimir Putin's been doing to the White House for the better part of a month. And so again, it's humiliating and funny when you do it to my dog. It's actually pretty embarrassing and pretty cringe when it happens to the America First, the Make America Great Again crowd. But there's nothing. The only people that seem to understand this, of course, are Zelensky, who says, Putin, he invaded my country. He believes he's winning. He's not going to sign a peace deal. He didn't sign a peace deal. Remember, guys, Vladimir Putin didn't sign a peace deal when he was losing, when he got pushed out of Kherson, when he got pushed out of Kharkiv, when he retreated from Kiev. All those were opportunities that he could have sat down and had sincere negotiations. And if he didn't do it then, why on earth is he going to do it now when he's, in his perception, winning? The only way Putin's going to sit down at a table and sincerely negotiate is going to be if he starts losing and losing badly. But again, based on the White House's, the thickness of everyone's skulls. And this isn't just like Trump bad. This is everyone surrounding him who has been clueless and naive, right? They're not stupid. They're just naive. They just don't know what they're doing any more than if you took you took a nurse and told them to do cardiac surgery, right? This is what you get when you take low-level real estate professionals that own a few dozen properties in South Florida and you elevate them to the most sophisticated and sensitive jobs in the entire country. You end up with just a streak of frightening underperformance. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for today. Thank you so much to the folks like James Sterling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Himmeling, Brian Kelly, Dale McCombs, James Olmo, Henry Roosier, all of our lieutenant team members. Couldn't do it without you guys. And I will see each and every one of you guys in the next one. Cheers.